Now here's where I left off the last time, with the top and bottom dovetails finished and the slots for the clamping lugs. I don't know about you, but I don't fancy dropping a £16 piece of metal with sharp corners onto my feet. So I'm just going to cut a couple of handholds in the sides of this block, lined up, as you can see, with the two holes that I used for holding it down in the first place. I had in mind using a ball-ended end mill to cut this slot, but I haven't got one. But I do have plenty of these roller chain sprocket cutters for the horizontal bar, and this one had a particularly pleasing profile to it, so I went ahead and took very light cuts until I'd reached full depth and the shoulders of the profile had started to contact the surface of the block. As this wasn't a full length cut, I was able to do it all in one setup without having to slide the block up and down the table. I'm just about able to squeeze the last little bit of travel out at that far end. I'll speed this up to save boring you. It's still pretty long, but this is the other side and I'm almost down to the full depth, as you can see. And this is, I think, the final or last but one cut. And if you're wondering what that piece of wood is doing jammed in against the counter shaft frame, I've picked up a nasty little rattle vibration, and that sort of dampens it down if I jam that piece of wood in there. And you can probably see that I'm still having to control the front gib with an Allen key, because I still haven't sorted out the right tension on that. This end of the table is very loose, and this end of the table coming up is very tight, so I'm having to constantly tighten and slacken the gib as I go across the table. By this time everything in the workshop is covered in a fine coat of cast iron dust, even though I've sort of tried to mitigate it by vacuuming it up as much as possible as I go. I think even the inside of my lungs are coated with a fine dust of cast iron. And here you can see where the shoulders of the profile of the cutter have actually started to cut into the surface of the block. And this was the other side as it was finished, with the slight nick marks. As I was making my own studs, I found that this BSF thread was too big. It was out of proportion for the stud. So I decided to make a slightly smaller 5/16 BSW thread on the outer ends. I sorted through my scrap box and found this nice piece of steel. It was just about the right size for the lugs, and without too much wastage I could square up all the sides ready for cutting in half, which I then marked up for. And this would allow me to bandsaw the block in half and make two lugs that were a loose fit in the slots once the rough sawn sides were squared up as well. I wanted to round the bottom edges like the original ones on the body of the mill, and this was my first setup on my mini rotary table with the horrible cheap clamps that they provided with it. And predictably the horrible clamps slipped and the end mill did this. It's a good job I have spare material so I can make another one. The top edge of the block will be cut at a 60-degree angle to match the dovetail, but the bottom I wanted to do at about 40 degrees to give it some different proportions. Right about here things started to go wrong and I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. And it dug into my brand new vise. I'd forgotten to tighten the clamping nuts on the swivel head, and the angle was changing as I was applying cutting pressure. And this is the first block finished with the 60-degree angle on the top to match the dovetail and the 40-degree angle on the bottom. I still wanted the rounded corners on that bottom edge, so I made my own more stout clamp to hold it on the rotary table and cut them as I had expected to the first time. And here's the both of blocks finished with those slightly rounded corners. I made this little mini stud as a transfer punch to make sure that the blocks landed in the dovetail correctly with the studs coming through in the right place. And this is what you get for doing things on the fly without doing proper measurements. The studs came through off centre of the flat surface. I didn't like the proportions of these blocks anyway, so as you can see I milled down a little bit more so that the stud came through with room enough for the washer and the nut. I hit all the sides of the block with the belt sander and to give them a nice finish and to square up that front face, and here I am just masking up ready for paint. I much prefer this black primer for the green paintwork. After the green, I decided to accent those two scalloped handholds in the red. I shortened the studs to make them more proportional to the blocks and screwed them in and locked them in with a bit of stud lock. With the lugs in place and two new 5/16 BSW nuts and washers, and I couldn't resist one final touch, so I made this etched brass plate, which will probably drive people mad in years to come when I'm long gone and they can't find this in the catalogue. I got some number 2 by 1/4 inch drive rivets, but they're too shiny, so I had to use a bit of patination fluid like I did for the background of the plate to age them a bit. This is a 3mm drill to drill the corners of the plate, slightly larger than the drive rivet diameter, and I marked out and drilled by hand because I couldn't put the block underneath my drill press, and then drove in the rivets with my brass hammer, and that was a 2mm drill for a tight fit on the drive rivets. And there you have it, the finished item, all painted up and shined up, ready to go into action. So first I clamped the riser block into place with the existing clamping lugs and slid on the vertical head and clamped it into place with the lugs on the other side, as you can see here, and it looks like it lives there. And now I've got more than 6 inches from the quill to the top of my vise, and I'm quite happy with it.